Good day, everyone. I am Geraldine Maneja. So we are going to talk about Nathaniel Hawthorne and his short story, Dr. Heidegger's Experiment.
So these are the following contents. So the first one is Nathaniel Hawthorne's biography. Second, Dr. Heidegger's experiment summary. Third, literal meaning. And fourth, connotative meaning. Fifth, literary devices used. And sixth, influences. And last, the theme.
So here's the biography of Nathaniel Hawthorne. So Nathaniel Hawthorne was an American novelist and short story writer who was a master of the allegorical and symbolic tale. He was born on July 4, 1804 in Salem, Massachusetts and died on May 19, 1864 in Plymouth, New Hampshire. So he is one of the American literature's best fiction authors. So during his early life, the author's great-great-great-grandfather William Hawthorne was a Puritan and the family that first to leave England. Before relocating to Salem, he settled in Dorchester, Massachusetts. He rose through the ranks of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, holding a variety of political posts, including magistrate and judge, and became well known for his harsh punishment. In his early 20s, just after graduating from college, Hawthorne probably added the W to his surname to distance himself from his infamous forefathers. Nathaniel Hawthorne Sr., Hawthorne's father, was a Marine captain who died of yellow fever in Dutch Suriname in 1808. After his death, his widow relocated to Salem with infant Nathaniel and two children to live with Manning relatives where they lived for 10 years. On November 10, 1813, while playing bat and ball, young Hawthorne was struck in the leg and became lame and bedridden for a year, despite the fact that multiple physicians could discover nothing wrong with him. So despite Hawthorne's concern, his uncle Robert Manning urged that the child should attend college. Hawthorne was sent to Bowdoin College in 1821 with the help of his uncle, so mainly because of his family ties to the area and partly because of the relatively low tuition fee. On his journey to Bowdoin, Hawthorne met future President Franklin at the stage top in Portland, and the two became friends. During his middle years, Hawthorne was appointed surveyor for the district of Salem and Beverly, as well as inspector of the revenue for the port of Salem. In April 1846, at a yearly salary of $1,200, he revealed to Longfellow that he had difficulty composing during his time. Like his former appointment to the Custom House in Boston, this job was subject to spoils system politics. Hawthorne was a Democrat who lost his job after the presidential election in 1848 when the administration in Washington changed. He submitted a protest letter to the Boston Daily Advertiser, which was attacked by Whigs and defended by the Democrats, making Hawthorne's firing a hot topic in New England. Hawthorne resumed writing and released the Scarlet Letter in mid-March 1850, with a preface that mentioned his 3-year stint at the Custom House and makes several references to local politicians who were pleased with their treatment. It was one of America's first mass-market publications, selling 2,500 copies in 10 days and earning Hawthorne's 1,500 over the course of 14 years. So here's the late years of Hawthorne. So Hawthorne traveled to Washington, D.C. with William D. Ticknor at the start of the American Civil War, where he met Abraham Lincoln and other notable figures. In 1862, he published the article chiefly about war matters, which detailed his experiences. He was unable to finish numerous more romantic novels due to his failing health, although his neighbor Bronson Alcott was concerned that Hawthorne was too unwell. But Hawthorne insisted on recuperative exertion with his friend Franklin Pierce, despite his stomach pain. He died in sleep on May 19, 1864, while on a tour of the White Mountains. So Pierce wrote Elizabeth Peabody a telegraph requesting her to personally inform Mrs. Hawthorne. So Mrs. Hawthorne was devastated by the news and was unable to handle the funeral arrangement herself. So here's the summary of Dr. Heidegger's experiment. So the story begins with all the Dr. Heidegger inviting four elderly friends over to his rather eerie study. So Colonel Killigrew, Mr. Medbourne, Mr. Gascoigne, and the widow Wycherley. So the four old folks have fallen a long way from their prime. Each squandered his own type of fortune, so which is the youth, money, power, and beauty, and is now in a miserable state. The narrator also informs us that when they were young, the three men used to fight over the attention of the widow Wycherley. Dr. Heidegger's creepy studies contains, among other things, a bust of hypocrites with whom Dr. Heidegger consulted from time to time, a magic black book, a skeleton in a closet, and a mirror that supposedly contains the visages of Dr. Heidegger's dead patients. The doctor presents his guests with four empty champagne glasses and an ornate vase full of clear bubbling liquid. He takes an old withered rose, drops it into the vase, and shows his guests that it has in fact been rejuvenated to a fresh brimming with water. Dr. Heidegger then claims that the liquid in the vase is water from the mythical fountain of youth. He would like their help in an experiment. So they drink the water. He sits back and watches. The guests are clearly skeptical, but they agree. Before they drink, Dr. Heidegger warned them not to make the same mistakes they did the first time they were young. So the guests drink and they believe they have grown young again. Of course, they act like fools, and the three men end up wrestling each other for the widow's attention. In their tussling, they knock over the vase, which spilled the elixir all over the floor. It doesn't take long for the effects of the potion to wear off, and the four guests find that they are old again. Dr. Heidegger does not regret the spilled elixir. He has learned his lesson by watching his guests and would not drink the water for anything. The guests, however, have learned nothing and vow to travel to Florida, find the fountain of youth, and drink from it day and night. So here's literal meaning in the story. So first, the very singular man, old Dr. Heidegger once invited four venerable friends to meet him in his study, according to the narrator. So the opening sentence established Dr. Heidegger as an odd character and as the instigator of events. Referring to the other four characters as venerable is a tongue-in-cheek reference to the fact that they are old but have gained no wisdom in their late years. As the text will go on to show. So for now, the narrator is speaking of them with respect, even though it will be revealed that he does not feel they deserve it. So second, they were all melancholy old creatures whose greatest misfortune it was they were not long ago in their graves, according also to the narrator. Mr. Medbourne, Mr. Gascoigne, Colonel Killigrew, and the widow Wycherley are unhappy in their old age, and the narrator claims that it would be better if they died. He laments their grave misfortune despite the fact that they are solely responsible for their own unhappiness. So third, my dear old friend, may I reckon on your aid in performing an exceedingly curious experiment according to Dr. Heidegger. So Dr. Heidegger's experiment resulted in the death at least one other character, his fiancée Sylvia Ward, and given what the readers know, has likely caused harm to others as well, while the other four are his buddies or at the very least close acquaintances. He is willing to risk their safety in order to learn what the water can do. So the fourth, so very ridiculously, was the idea that knowing how closely repentance treads behind the steps of error, they should ever go astray again, according to the narrator. All four experimental subjects agree that if they could start over, they would live their lives differently. This is completely false, as they have not learned from their mistakes, but rather have become incapable of acting on their vices. So fifth, but the doctor's four friends had taught no such lesson to themselves. The four experimental subjects have learned no more from the experiment than they did from life, and others are continuing to chase easy temptation rather than accepting the natural progress of their lives. So here's the connotative meaning in the story. So first, flowers. Dr. Heidegger has retained a flower that his late fiancé gave him half a century ago. It is crushed, dried, and gray now, yet the water of youth brings it back to life for a time. So, the flowers and blooming are utilized to describe youth throughout the novel, particularly gorgeous and sensuous youth. So second, mirror. Dr. Heidegger's mirror has a habit of reflecting reality more accurately than what is seen in the room. When the chambermaid tries to clean the doctor's magic book, horrible faces appear to warn her away. The mirror seems to act as a moral judge and reveal what is wicked in the story. And third, the water. The shortness and fragility of youth are symbolized by Dr. Heidegger's provision of water from the fountain of youth. It has the appearance of champagne. Furthermore, his guest antics topple and destroy the water supply, resulting in a second loss and wasted youth due to their vices. So here's the literary devices used in the story. So first, the symbolism. So the rose represented acceptance as seen by the doctor's decision to let it continue to age naturally. So it is also representation of youth in full bloom. The aging process is illustrated as it withers. It also a love instrument, and the entire control of Dr. Heidegger's in the experiments, getting them to drink more, depicts the control of time. And last, the water evaporating depicts the irreversible passage of time. So the second literary devices used is personification. So an example of personification in the story is the brazen head of Hippocrates frown. This is a representation on how people feel when statues scare someone. People, for the most part, give statues a human's expression if they are scared of the statue. This quote exact example of this. Another example is the statue's eyes followed me. Here's the influences in this short story. So first, the historical. So dark romanticism. Romanticism was a literary movement that emerged in Europe in the late 18th century as a reaction to the previous century's rationalism. So romanticism emphasized heroic individuals, emotional knowledge and inspiration, and an intimate relationship with nature. So romanticism gave birth to two parallel tendencies in the American 19th century literary tradition, which is transcendentalism and dark romanticism. So transcendentalism was a positive, spiritually oriented application of romantic concept that was concerned with how people could become their best self. So dark romanticism, on the other hand, was a gloomy literary trend that focused on human flaws, the tragedy brought on by sin, and the ways in which well-intentioned social projects might backfire. So Dr. Heidegger's experiment is a notable example of this literary genre, as it follows four elderly characters who, after being given a second chance at youth after squandering the first, quickly return to every vice they were before too old to indulge in. So here's the influences in social. So science during the 19th century, science and technology advanced rapidly in many countries during 19th century, particularly in the fields of electricity, chemistry, transportation, mechanization, and medicine. Society struggled to keep up with the consequences of rapid progress, and works like Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Birthmark and Dr. Heidegger's experiment reveals apprehension about experimenting without concern for moral consequences. So Dr. Heidegger's experiment is designed for a reader who has a basic understanding on scientific process and medical discoveries. But the story's mystical components make a distinction between science and magic, and Dr. Heidegger's study is littered with both. This indicates a situation of rapid advancement in which any discovery is feasible. So here's the influences in sociology. So Dr. Heidegger's experiment demonstrates that people are prone to repeating their mistake without thinking about it. He cautions his test subject against acting like they did when they were younger. However, after their second drink, they promptly revert to their youthful self. After a third drink, they show their fundamental selfishness by mocking their old age attire mocking the doctor, and finally, here's the theme of the story. So the first theme is wisdom and age. The audience is introduced to Dr. Heidegger's visitor as venerable or wise beyond their age. They are anything but in actuality. Dr. Heidegger's experiment explores the idea that if a person could return to their childhood, they would have the wisdom to prevent their mistakes. So the second one is dangerous experimentation. So Dr. Heidegger is a man of science and sorcery, and he enjoys putting others in peril to further his own goals. So Sylvia Ward, his fiancée, is said to have been affected with some lethal disorder for which he administered a prescription that killed her. He has a large portrait of her in his study and has preserved the flower she gave him for almost half a century. So the reader has little reason to doubt he loved her. He did, however, give her something he likely knew could be deadly for a slight disorder, implying a level of irresponsibility in the name of discovery and power. So next is the pessimism about human nature. So Dr. Heidegger's experiment examined if people may improve themselves by learning from their mistake. His experiment relies significantly on the idea that people will fail repeatedly and the results are as expected. Arigus, says the doctor, that I have so well selected the subjects of my experiment.
So that's all for today. Thank you for listening and don't hesitate to ask questions.